A lot of organizations currently are really focused on how they can boost employee engagement and try to reduce employee burnout. For the purposes of this conversation, we're going to just say that employee burnout is the experiential opposite of employee engagement, where engagement is defined as employees energetically pursuing the goals of their job and their role. Burnout is the lack of that energy, where they're so ground down by organizational processes or difficulties that they don't have energy left to put into accomplishing their work. And despite the fact that a lot of organizations are currently having conversations around these two phenomena, what we're finding at McChrystal Group is that a lot of our clients are having these conversations and addressing these concerns too late. Other organizations have found that their research has shown that burnouts, if addressed too late, is really difficult to turn around successfully. So organizations who wait until their employees look like the matches on the right-hand side of this graphic are unlikely to be successful in being able to reverse that burnout and get those employees back to being engaged individuals. Instead, what McChrystal Group has found with our clients is that organizations are a lot more likely to be successful in these efforts if they start to address the problem when their employees look a lot more like the matches on the left-hand side of this graphic. So to that end, we're going to take a look at a previous example of a recent McChrystal Group client who brought us in not actually specifically for engagement, but rather to help with some operational difficulties that they were having. And the engagement piece was very much a secondary concern because they weren't yet seeing the bad engagement metrics that tends to get organizations concerned about that. They were far more concerned with the business operations. So McChrystal Group came into this organization and we performed an assessment with the leadership, the directors and up. And what we found when we asked those leaders to rank the determinants of how they spend their time, the directors and up could rank things like their own choices, the priorities given to them by their managers, established schedules within their function, etc. But instead of any of that, the number one thing that these group of leaders said primarily determines how they spend their time was addressing immediate problems that arise. So in other words, this was a very reactive group of leaders whose time was consumed with putting out many fires that popped up regularly, rather than being able to focus on established priorities and schedules within their role and within their organization. And one of the primary things that we found that correlated with this reactivity in firefighting was whether or not these individual leaders understood how to action the strategy. So specifically, these leaders who did agree that the strategy was actionable were 2 times less likely to have their time dominated by immediate problems that arise. So upon further inspection and digging, what we found was that the reason for this was that leaders who understood their role in actioning the strategy were much better able to prioritize and triage any immediate problems that came up so that they could focus on accomplishing the tasks that were most important to delivering their strategic objectives. And they were able to either delegate or deprioritize tasks that had less immediate relevance to those overall organizational strategies. Now, we did spend some time looking at some of the follow-on effects within this organization of this overall high level of reactivity and firefighting. What we're looking at on this slide on the bottom axis here are the various layers of leadership that we evaluated. So you can see there's about 4 layers of leadership that we looked at. And the bars here represent the amount of those leadership levels who said that they always or very often receive appropriate notice and lead time from managers to accomplish important projects. And you can see that overall, as we expect to see, given the poor reactivity metrics of the previous slide, we can see that indeed most people are not getting that appropriate notice and lead time. None of these numbers break even 40% agree. But what was for this client, unexpected follow-on consequence of this reactivity was an effect on the client's engagement scores, specifically represented here on this line as the percentage of employees who said that they feel energetic when they are hard at work at their job. Now, as I said, this client was not overly concerned with their engagement scores at this time because they weren't too bad. The average here is something around 65% of their employees said that they feel very energetic when they're hard at work. Nonetheless, you can see that there's a clear correlation for those leadership levels that are less likely to get the notice and lead time. There's a corresponding effect of lower percentages of employees saying that they feel energetic. So the conversation that we had with this client was that if they didn't address this issue of people understanding their role in the strategy and therefore being less reactive and having to do less firefighting, if that went unaddressed and unhandled, they were going to see negative follow-on effects down the line where these leaders that we were evaluating were going to get more and more burnt out as they had to deal more and more often with firefighting and trying to accomplish tasks without the appropriate lead time. It was going to sap their energy levels if not addressed. So what we did with this client to address this issue was we worked with them to establish a better strategy alignment whereby leaders and teams understood specifically which objectives those teams had to accomplish to support the company objectives so that they were better able to prioritize what they were going to do. And equally as importantly, but much more difficult, to have conversations around what initiatives they were going to deprioritize or delegate so that because they didn't support the overall company objectives as immediately as some other priorities did. And by doing this exercise in strategic alignment with an eye toward having a more predictable work rhythm that was less consumed with firefighting immediate problems, this organization was not only able to improve their overall operational business functioning, but they were also able to get ahead of issues of employee burnout before their employees were looking like the completely burnt up matches from the previous slide.